Thank you so much for inviting me. And this is a great turnout, and it's particularly good timing for the Hudson Climate Cafe. I don't know how many people followed what happened at the State House today, but there were multiple actions by climate groups. So Mothers Out Front was at the governor's office, and they did a rally in front of the State House to advocate for the House and Senate to pass a comprehensive climate bill. And then perhaps on the more radical side is an organization called Extinction Rebellion. Mm-hmm. And they did chain themselves to the front of the State House today to further ask for action. And actually going to the State House obviously fairly often, there's been someone from Extinction Rebellion or a related group in front of the State House every day for 2 years. So every day for 2 years there's been someone even out in the cold with a banner calling on the legislature to take action. So I do agree that we need to pass a comprehensive climate bill this session, and I'm sure a lot of people have followed really closely what happened. But I'll give a little bit of detail, and then I want to go into what the House bill does and the Senate bill does, each of which has really strong provisions around climate. What happened was in the legislature there's joint committees for subject matter. So for energy issues, for climate issues, there's the Joint Committee on Telecommunications, Utility, and Energy, TUE. So that's chaired by Senator Mike Barrett and Representative Jeff Roy, both who are terrific advocates and just very knowledgeable around energy issues. And so that committee, over the course of 2 years, hears all the bills that are filed. I filed a lot of bills. I won't go into detail what they are. You can look at my website, senatoreldridge.com, and I have a link for all my clean energy bills. But all those bills were heard by the committees, and then in this case, the Senate took action first and passed a climate bill. It was officially known as an act upgrading the grid and protecting ratepayers. So that was the name of the Senate bill. And then after the Senate passed its bill, it goes to the House, and then the House decides what it wants to do. So then it passed its version of the climate bill. So there was a lot of expectation that we would get a climate bill passed. I'm sure everyone here knows that in 2021 we passed the roadmap, 2050 roadmap bill, and then we passed 2 years ago the legislation that particularly focused on increasing offshore wind, but also some solar. So every session for the past 6 years, including this session, we passed a strong climate bill. So I think we should do that this year as well. I won't go into too much detail about legislative minutia, but what happens is the Senate and House on any subject matter, once they each pass a bill on that subject matter, a conference committee is formed, and there's 3 state representatives and 3 state senators that get appointed, and then they negotiate the details of the bill. So the night of July 31st, there was negotiations going on because we end our formal sessions on July 31st in the even year, and so those negotiations were going on. But unfortunately, the House and Senate could not agree on a final bill. Negotiating pieces of the House and Senate. So we ended our formal session without an agreement. So that's why the climate groups were out there today to advocate, to urge the legislature to come back into session and to pass a climate bill. So I don't have too many more details other than my sense is that there are discussions between the House and Senate on that bill. And so most importantly, what are in the bills? So I think the thing it's really important to remember is that this session, really thanks to the leadership of Governor Healy, is there were working groups formed to focus on a really important issue, is that if we're really serious about meeting our climate goals, including the roadmap legislation 2050 of 2021, is that how do we make sure that we're building enough solar, offshore wind, geothermal, and other forms of clean energy? And so the challenge is, Massachusetts is a home rule state, so we're very focused on our local control, local zoning, is that there has been often opposition to solar projects. There's been some opposition to geothermal. There, of course, is a whole offshore wind opposition from some people on Cape Cod. And so that is slowing down the construction of clean energy. So then we're not going to meet our goals, and we'll fall into the climate crisis in Massachusetts. New England is one of the regions that's most susceptible to the climate crisis. Obviously, being on the shore, we have relatively low lands that are easy to flood, as we've seen with a lot of coastal towns and with Boston. So we really have to take this very seriously. So that's the dynamic. So the working group, one of the working groups, was looking at siting and permitting, and so it gets into specific details, which I'll go into a little bit. There's a good summary here on the House bill. Just to give people a flavor for it, is how do we streamline the permitting for clean energy projects? So what the House bill does, and again, these are bills that have passed either the House or Senate, is it streamlines the permitting process for small clean energy projects under 25 megawatts and small energy storage systems like battery storage under 100 megawatt hours, by allowing project developers to submit a permit application seeking a single permit that consolidates all necessary local permits and approvals. So what you're seeing is trying to create a compromise between cities and towns and the state about getting these permits approved. The requirement would be this decision by a municipality would have to be within 12 months. And unfortunately, there are some projects that take longer than that, and sometimes developers just walk away from the projects because it takes too long to build. Here in Hudson, you have Mark Durenberger. He does a lot of great solar projects, so he's in communication a lot with myself and, of course, Representative Hogan about some of his frustrations as a solar developer. But just to give a local example from Acton, and this is where the Pogo quote, we have met the enemy and it is us, is Acton's fairly focused on climate action, but when a developer proposed a battery storage in a neighborhood to basically keep the power for local solar development, the neighborhood opposed it. So you have a town that has passed a climate crisis action. You have a town that's known for being a leader on climate action, but then one particular neighborhood says not in my backyard. So what this bill is trying to do is to say there's got to be a fixed timeline for these projects. That can't just be delayed by planning boards, by select boards, by other entities. For bigger projects, the bill would allow the Energy Facilities Siting Board, which is one of these quasi-public entities that makes decisions on major energy projects, including offshore wind. It would allow the EFSB to issue consolidated permits for large clean energy generation facilities over 25 megawatts and large energy storage facilities, and it requires the EFSB to establish criteria governing siting and permitting. So, doesn't sound too exciting, but it's absolutely critical if we're really serious about building the solar, the offshore wind, the geothermal to meet our carbon emissions reduction goals. So that's part of what the House bill does, which I think is excellent. But I would say that is an area where both the Senate and House largely have agreement, and I think there is a real thrust to getting that done this session. So the House bill also creates an Office of Environmental Justice and Equity. So when we passed the 2050 roadmap, I had a bill updating the environmental justice law to basically say, and this unfortunately deals with dirty energy facilities usually, is where does the landfill go, where does the incinerator go, where does the gas production facility go, it often goes to working class or poor communities, particularly communities of color that have less political power, right? So let's be blunt, it's not being proposed in Lexington, right? It's being proposed in Lawrence and Haverhill and in Springfield. So built upon that law from 2021, the House bill establishes the Office of Environmental Justice and Equity. So I think that's excellent to look at all these things through that lens, because unfortunately in Massachusetts we don't just have clean energy projects being proposed, but we still have some dirty energy projects being proposed, including some of the biomass proposals in Western Mass and Springfield, and then in Quincy, near Quincy, there's the gas peak gas proposal. So that's really good. Closer to this area is the Hanscom Air Force or airport, excuse me. Is that, I don't know how closely people have followed this, but a big issue in Acton and Concord and Lexington and Lincoln is that very disappointingly there are developers that have proposed a further expansion of Massport, of obviously private planes almost entirely used by the rich, and that would contribute so much carbon emissions to the region, to the state. So it's actually, you know, we're going backwards on our carbon emissions reductions goals. So to Senator Mike Barrett's credit and Representative Simon Cataldo, who represents the Concord area, and I'll focus on the House language, is that there was language put in there changing the mission of Massport, is saying that they have to consider all of the Massport decisions, basically approvals for development, for expansion, to consider the impact on climate. So that's really, really important. Really praise Representative Cataldo for getting that in the House bill. So the theory is, if that becomes law, this proposal would be rejected by Massport because, of course, it would add a tremendous amount of carbon emissions of all the gas fuel, the jet fuel, and so, you know, really hope that becomes law. So that's in the House bill. And then the House bill also procures 9.5 million more megawatts of clean energy resources, particularly offshore wind, but also considering nuclear power. And would love to hear questions, feedback on that, because that is becoming, I would say, a greater discussion is nuclear power clean energy? You know, how do we feel about, you know, efforts to expand it, which isn't happening in New England. If anything, we're shutting down nuclear plants, but it does provide a cleaner, you know, fuel source than gas or oil or coal. I personally am not very supportive of nuclear, or at least of nuclear expansion, but you know, there is a growing discussion about whether to include nuclear power. So that's also in the House bill. The House bill also looks at electronic vehicle infrastructure. So what are we doing realistically to make sure that there's enough charging stations in every part of the state so more people would buy an electric vehicle? I completely understand for many people, especially people, you know, less well off, why would they buy an electric vehicle if they don't have the confidence they can charge their car nearby, you know, going to work or something? So that's another part of the bill. And then I will say, and this is where, you know, I think those of us who care about the climate really have to be thoughtful and sort of figure out this balance, is that, and I think there was a Globe story just out today, is that Massachusetts has the highest energy cost, the most expensive utility bills. So, you know, obviously we need to combat climate change. We're in a climate crisis, but there are some aspects of our laws that are you know, raising our electricity rates. There's a fee that we all, many of us pay. I don't think it applies to munis, but the investor-owned utilities pays a fee around to contribute to the Green Communities Act. So what the House bill would also do is it grants the DPU, Department of Public Utilities, the ability to establish criteria for a moderate income discount rate for electricity rates in addition to low income. So if you're low income, there's already a discount rate. So really give the House credit particularly Chairman Roy, for looking to propose for a moderate income discount. So I think that is important, because I will say that is becoming more of a sensitive issue, is how much are these electricity or utility rates going to be. I will say, and this is a real bigger challenge I won't get too much into, but offshore wind, right, is that the problem right now with the offshore wind developers is some of them have walked away in Massachusetts because it has gotten so more expensive, especially with inflation, with the pandemic, with the supply chain problems that we have in our country and the world. So those are the main parts of the House bill. And then the Senate bill does also have the siting reform that I explained about, under 25 megawatts, over 25 megawatts. So it has essentially the same language. That's why I really hope we can get that passed. It also has a top priority from Mothers Out Front about just transition. Okay, right now, and I know this is an issue in Hudson because I won't name names, but I've seen some people protesting near certain housing developments. Certainly not anyone who just laughed. But we have a problem, in Massachusetts in general, is that if you have housing or commercial developments that are getting approved and they're still relying on gas, then we're expanding, the gas infrastructure, and then that's for what, 50 years, 60 years, maybe more. So what the Senate bill would do is, and this is an act upgrading the grid and protecting ratepayers. It directs the DPU. DPU is really playing a really important role here, and I will say the DPU, DOER, under Governor Healy's leadership, you actually have people that believe in the climate crisis, that are pro clean energy, unlike under Governor Baker, where they were more industry people. So the DPU would be directed to consider greenhouse gas impacts when it weighs a petition by a gas company to expand its territory, which is basically expanding gas infrastructure for new neighborhoods. So I know that's an issue, including being discussed in Hudson about, what should the decisions be made about some of the green building code options that every community has. So that is in the Senate bill. That was a Mothers Out Front priority. Electrification of transportation. So it's looking at how do we electrify our commuter rail system. So how do we electrify all the buses? And when you think about environmental justice, where more often than not are the MBTA buses? They're in cities, generally less well-off areas. Well, if they're all diesel, and if the state decides to buy more diesel buses, that's only going to add to the high asthma rate in poor communities and communities of color. So, let's get on a better schedule for buying clean energy vehicles, obviously electric vehicles, ideally. So it has that language in the Senate bill. Consumer protection. So how many people here get every week a letter from a energy choice, well, maybe not as much in Hudson, but I don't know if you do, but an energy choice company that you have options for having green, clean energy for your electric bill. So I know I live in Marlboro, I certainly get it. Is unfortunately some of those companies are not legitimate companies, and then someone signs up for it, and then they get ripped off, or it might be a teaser rate, and then suddenly their bill gets higher, or sometimes the companies actually don't even are delivering clean energy to power your house. They just claim to. So what the Senate bill does is it basically creates a standard for these companies, and working with the Attorney General would only allow those that are either nonprofit or have been vetted by the state that are legitimate, as opposed to getting these letters in the mail and not knowing if something's real or not. So the Senate bill does include that, and then in addition, it has some pieces that I would argue are sort of related to climate, though I'd be the first to say they're perhaps a little bit more outside of scope. So the Senate bill also includes the expansion of the bottle bill. So that is something that many legislators have advocated for. So it would increase the bottle bill to 10 cents and would apply to bottled water, to juices, which it currently doesn't apply, and obviously reduces litter in our community. Hopefully produces less plastic, which obviously come from oil. So that's in the Senate bill. And then I do want to mention some sort of climate mitigation bills, which one of them is a bill that I filed for a few years. It's the drought management bill. And unfortunately, this gets into the fact that we have to accept that we're already seeing climate impacts, right? We're already seeing the impacts. We're seeing flooding, we're seeing more drought, we're seeing heat waves. So what the drought management bill would do is, any one of us driving around in our hometown, you see the signs that says, you have to, turn off your water. You can't use your water on an odd day or even day. That's because right now, decisions around drought and water use are strictly local. It's just done by each city or town. Obviously, the water underground crosses, city and town boundaries. So it would empower the state, the Department of Environmental Protection, to make regional decisions about water use. So I think this is really, really important. I would say particularly for our farms, is that there have been years where we've had so little water that our farmers have said they can't access the water and therefore their crops have been destroyed. So this would empower the state to limit water use from a regional perspective, to protect our watershed, to protect our rivers and streams. So that's a bill that did make it into the Senate climate bill. And then sort of on climate mitigation, a flood protection bill. So what are the plans happening in every region to prepare for the fact that there are greater floods happening in many communities? So you're seeing more and more in these communities. There's a flash flood, and suddenly cars are been flooded out, and you saw what happened in Leominster, which that city is still recovering from the flooding. So it basically require more planning around flood protection and really looking at where is development happening, and does it make sense to build one more building at the Seaport District in Boston when we already know the current buildings are getting flooded, and that's the first area that will likely be flooded with climate impacts. So that's part of the Senate bill as well. The Senate bill also does touch upon around electric vehicles. Basically directing the DPU to make it easier to install pole-mounted chargers for parking spots and streets. It also authorizes in condo associations, which sometimes are hostile to electric vehicles, or disagreements amongst the board members around whether you can put in certain additions. So it would authorize condo association boards to install energy-efficient devices and EV chargers in common areas, and make heat pumps more efficient by allowing installers to use the most up-to-date refrigerants. So it also expands the tax credit to buy a new or used electric vehicle. So that's in the Senate bill. So again, both the House and Senate bill have very good provisions. To add a little other quirk to what's happening on Beacon Hill is that, and I commend her for this, is that Governor Healy separately filed the energy and permitting language in a supplemental budget, which are supplemental budgets we pass on a regular basis. So she just recently filed that. So the way I see it is she's sending a message to the legislature, let's pass a comprehensive climate bill. And so hopefully the conferees, those three House members, the three senators, can negotiate a strong climate bill. Ideally, it would have all the parts of the House bill I just described and all the parts of the Senate bill. Sometimes that happens. Sometimes there are pieces that don't make it. But that's being negotiated right now, and that's why Mothers Out Front, Mass Power Forward, and Extinction Rebellion were at the State House today. And I did get a chance to talk to some constituents. So there were constituents there. There were activists there, and thank them for their advocacy. Because it has really been 2 years of advocacy, and I do hope we can pass the climate bill this session, and I do think it's possible to do. I think we have the political will to get it done, and it doesn't happen if not for groups like Green Hudson and so many folks here that are pushing us as elected officials to take strong action. We passed 2 strong climate laws in the past 4 years. Now we really need to get this legislation passed. So that's my update, and happy to take questions. I can also later I can send it to Jeanette or whomever. Is I do have a summary of what I just went through about both the House and Senate climate bill. I always say, as much as I'm somewhat familiar and file a lot of climate bills, climate policy, energy policy is incredibly complex. So we all need to work together. And I do serve as the Senate chair of the Clean Energy Caucus. So we have had a real focus on passing a bill this session. So yeah, so thanks again for having me, and happy to take questions.
The 6-member group that was reviewing or negotiating the bill before you shut down on
The conference committee. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Are they still involved in the work that's going on now in preparation for, are they still part of that process?
Yeah, that's saying the conference committee still exists, so it goes until the end of the session. So that's why I don't have too many details, but in talking to Senator Barrett, my understanding is there are discussions happening amongst the conferees.
And following on that, if they come to an agreement, you have to wait until January 1st for everybody to vote on it?
No. So once there's a conference committee, that means there's a final bill, and then legislators vote up or down on it, so it can't be amended. So you either vote for it or against it.
Right.
So that really has to come up between now and literally the morning that we get sworn in again. So January 1st or 2nd or whatever. So between now and then, we have to take up the bill. And it's a separate issue, but it's been talked about a lot. There's also a major economic development bill, and there's also a lot of pressure advocacy for us to pass that too. So my hope would be that perhaps we'd have a one-day session where we all come in and pass both bills and get them to the governor's desk.
That'd be great.
Do you know when that might be?
Oh, definitely not.